She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just picked up the pen and signed. And that was the moment Jackson Pierce made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he was erasing her, a quiet woman. No family, no money, no power. He had the lawyers, the penthouse, the supermodel fiancé. He had everything. And she had nothing except one secret growing inside her. Two secrets, actually. Because while Jackson was toasting his new life at a rooftop party in Beverly Hills, she was alone on a cold parking garage floor, whispering to the babies he would never know existed. But here's what he didn't see coming. He signed those papers without reading them, every single word. And buried in page after page of legal language was one clause, one paragraph that would strip him of his name, his company, his future, and hand everything back to the woman he threw away. This story is a reminder that your quietest moment can become your most powerful one. Strength doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like a woman who simply outlasts the storm. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me because this one is for you. And if this story moves you, hit like, drop a comment telling me what you think Jackson deserved, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Velvet Red Lies because every week we bring you stories about women who refuse to stay broken.
Chicago was gray and icy the next morning. While the whole city was waking up, with buses hissing and coffee shops humming, I was just sitting on the bed in my tiny studio apartment, staring at myself in the window. My eyes were swollen shut from crying all night. My heart just felt bruised. Those divorce papers were on my little kitchen counter, and I swear they still smelled like his cologne. A smell I used to love, but now it just turned my stomach. It wasn't just heartbreak, you see. I was terrified and completely alone. Growing up in the foster system teaches you how to get by on nothing, but it doesn't prepare you for being thrown away by the one person you trusted with your whole heart. I married Jackson Pierce thinking I'd finally found a family, a safe place. I thought he saw the strength in me that no one else ever had. But I guess I was wrong. I had become a problem that didn't fit into his perfect life. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from my boss. I knew what it was before I even listened. Concern, but also pressure to get back to work. "Camila, just take today," she said. "Call me when you're ready." Ready? I didn't even know who I was anymore. For 3 years, I had tried so hard to be the perfect wife for a CEO. Quiet, polished, and always smiling, no matter what. The kind of wife who stays in the shadows. But the truth is, he had spent all that time chipping away at me. "You overthink everything," he'd say. "You're too emotional." Or my favorite, "You should be grateful I'm patient with you." And I believed him. You do, when you've spent your childhood trying so hard to be good enough. I never once fought back. I thought staying quiet was the price for having a home, a family I wanted so badly. But then the home was gone, the marriage was gone, and our little family. Well, you two were hanging by a thread. I had nobody. No mother to call for advice, no siblings to cry with. My best friend had moved away. At work, most people thought I'd only gotten ahead because I married the CEO, not realizing my IQs put me in the top 1% of analysts in our field. I built my career just like I'd built my life, quietly and on my own. As the sun came up, I made myself get up. I washed my face, put on an old sweater my foster mom knit for me. It was the only thing I kept from back then. I needed something warm. I needed to feel safe. I had no idea what to do next. How was I going to have a baby with no partner, no money, and no one to lean on? How could I start my life over from nothing for a second time? But somewhere, underneath all that fear, a little flicker started. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was more like stubbornness. I was about to find out how strong I really was. You see, Chicago started to feel like a city full of ghosts. Every street corner held a memory of Jackson. I felt like I couldn't breathe. So, when my job said I could work remotely, I made a choice that even surprised me. I was going to leave, not just the apartment, but the whole city. By the end of that week, I was at O'Hare Airport, dragging 2 suitcases that held everything I owned. My heart was pounding, like I was getting away with something. The airport announcements just sounded like noise in the background. My whole world had been reduced to 2 bags and the fragile secret I was carrying. I prayed I was strong enough to keep you safe. My destination was New York City. It wasn't some grand adventure. It was about survival. I figured New York was big enough for me to just disappear. It was busy enough that no one would bother me with questions, and loud enough to drown out all the sadness in my heart. When the plane landed, the city was just as chaotic as I'd hoped. Horns honking, cabs everywhere, steam rising from the streets, and beneath all that chaos, I felt a little something stir inside me, a quiet rhythm of possibility. I thought, maybe this is a good place to fall apart, so I can start to build myself up again. I had a temporary rental in Washington Heights, a little third-floor place with a noisy radiator and a lovely view of a brick wall. But it was quiet, and it was all mine, a world away from the life I'd had with Jackson. I remember unpacking my things so carefully, like it was a ceremony. A new start doesn't have to be fancy, I told myself. It just has to be yours. The next morning, I went out for a walk. I had only ever seen Manhattan from the back of Jackson's town car. Now I was just another stranger on the sidewalk, and there was a small, sad kind of freedom in that. Central Park was just beautiful that time of year, with all the leaves turning gold and red. I found a bench and just sat there, my hands over my belly. I didn't look pregnant yet. I hardly even felt like it. I was so scared all the time. I was afraid of losing you, of failing at this too. But sitting there, with all these strangers living their lives around me, I finally took a deep breath. It was right there, under those big, old trees, that everything started to shift. I didn't notice him at first. A tall man in a charcoal coat was leaning against a lamppost, just watching the park. There was a quiet stillness about him that seemed unusual for New York, but he saw me. He told me later he saw a woman trying to hold the weight of the world on her shoulders. I didn't know it yet, but that was Adrian Crowell. That was your father. He was about to change everything I thought I knew about strength and loyalty. And in just a few weeks, he would become the most important person in our lives. But for now, he was just a stranger in the park. I was just a ghost, watching my own life from a distance. While I was in New York, trying to find my footing, Jackson was back in Los Angeles throwing a party. Not a small get-together, but a big, flashy affair. Like he needed the whole world to see he'd won. It was on the roof of his company's tower, all glittering lights and important people. And right in the middle of it all was Jackson, looking perfect in a suit, with one hand on his glass and the other on her thigh, on sienna veils. She had this practiced smile for the cameras, but even then, I could see something sharp behind her eyes, a calculating look. She was a woman who knew how to get what she wanted from powerful men. And with Jackson, she wanted it all. I learned later that he'd leaned in, whispering to her. It looked so romantic to everyone else, but I know him. It wasn't affection, it was ownership. She asked if the board had approved the merger. He told her it was happening Monday, that he'd soon own the market. Then she brought me up, asking about his ex-wife. He just laughed, honey, called me irrelevant, said I was probably off crying somewhere, but that it wasn't his problem. And she just hid a little smirk behind her glass. His pride was a weakness she knew just how to use. A man like that, so sure of himself, is easy to lead. But I think it bothered her that he even thought of me at all, even with annoyance. You see, Sienna wasn't the type to share a man's attention, not even with a memory. His mother, Evelyn, was there, and she saw right through Sienna. Evelyn comes from old money, and she considered that woman a passing fancy. I heard she leaned over to her sister and said, loud enough for him to hear, "He's making a mistake. That girl is no Camila." And Jackson heard it. It must have stung, because deep down, he knew I was the only one who ever truly believed in him, the person, not the title. But his ego always won. He probably just mumbled to Sienna that his mother would come around after the wedding. Oh, he had it all planned out. But what he didn't know was that his perfect little world had a huge crack running right through it. A crack he'd made himself the night he forced me to sign those papers. He raised his glass to toast a future he thought was unshakable. But thousands of miles away, I was carrying the one thing he never thought he could have: a child. A truth that would eventually shatter his entire kingdom of lies. New York was slowly becoming a place I could breathe again. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I was getting by. I could walk outside without breaking down. The terror that something was wrong with the baby didn't wake me up as much. I could even work a little without my hands trembling, but that kind of quiet never seems to last, does it? It was a Friday night. I'd just come back from the grocery store, humming to myself to keep the morning sickness at bay. I turned on the radio for some noise, just expecting the traffic report. Instead, I heard a chipper voice announce the surprise engagement of Jackson Pierce to the model Sienna Vale. They said the party was at the Beverly Hills Hotel, filled with celebrities. The groceries just slipped from my hands. All the apples went rolling across the floor. I couldn't believe it. That ring, they said, was the size of a small lake. And Jackson, he looked so proud of himself. Everything started to go blurry. I had to grab the counter to keep from falling. I couldn't seem to catch my breath. Engaged? Already? Just 9 months after he threw me out like I was nothing. My fingers were shaking so badly, but I grabbed my phone and searched his name, even though I knew it would hurt. Every single headline felt like a slap in the face. The new power couple, the CEO and the supermodel. Pierce rebounds into love. My chest felt so tight I could barely stand. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was public humiliation. Then a video started playing automatically. A reporter asked Sienna about Jackson's previous marriage. She just let out this delicate, cruel little laugh and said, "Well, everyone outgrows someone, right?" He didn't say a word to defend me. He just wrapped his arm tighter around her and kissed her for the cameras. I put my hands on my stomach, trying to stay calm for the baby, for the babies. I had to breathe, but then my phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't know. I almost didn't open it. It was a photo of them under a big flower arch, holding champagne. Someone had circled his wrist in red. He was wearing the watch I gave him, the one he told me he lost. He hadn't lost it. He'd saved it for a bigger moment, a better audience. In that instant, something inside me just snapped. The pain was still there, but it became something else. Sharper, colder. I knew then I couldn't just hide. I wouldn't try to outshine them. I would simply outlast them. Betrayal has a funny way of changing a person. It can turn softness into something like steel. And before that night was over, there was an unexpected knock on my door from someone who had seen the same news and decided I shouldn't be alone. The knock was so gentle at first, I thought I'd imagined it. I was still on the floor with all the spilled groceries around me. Then it came again, a bit firmer. A man's voice called my name, calm and deep. "It's Adrian Crowell," he said. "We met in the park." I remembered him then, the quiet man whose eyes seemed to understand things without asking. I didn't know his name back then, and I certainly didn't know he was a billionaire, or how our pasts were tangled together. All I knew was that I was a complete mess and didn't want anyone to see me. "I'm not really seeing anyone right now," I called out. He paused, then said, "I saw the news. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." My throat just closed up. That one simple question. Nobody had asked me if I was all right in so long. Not Jackson. Not ever. And here was this stranger, offering a kindness I felt I didn't deserve. I opened the door just a little. Adrian was standing there, his face full of a quiet, respectful concern. He didn't stare at my tear-stained cheeks. He just gave me a little nod, as if acknowledging my pain without needing to dissect it. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. I hesitated, then just stepped back. My little apartment was a wreck, but he didn't seem to notice. Instead, he knelt and just started picking up the apples from the floor. "You don't have to do that," I whispered, and he just looked up at me and said, "I know. And that's exactly why I'm doing this." "Boa demban was tumagwa," I told him. I remember feeling something so delicate inside me just shatter. After he put the groceries down, Adrian just leaned against the counter, giving me my space. He said so gently, "Things like this, being shamed in public, it cuts deeper than people think." I could barely get the words out. "I wasn't shamed," I whispered. He just raised an eyebrow, you know? Not teasing, just knowing. I finally let myself sink into a chair. "Fine," I breathed. Maybe I was. "Of course you were," he said, his voice so calm. "It was because you're human. And because he was supposed to be your protector." I just buried my face in my hands. Why did it still ache so badly, after everything? Why did I still feel like the one who'd failed? Adrienne's answer was so simple. "You loved him." Love doesn't just switch off because the person wasn't worthy of it. I couldn't breathe for a second. No one had ever put it that way before. The only sound in the little apartment was the refrigerator humming. "Camila," he started, choosing his words so carefully. "You're not by yourself, not now. Whatever you have to deal with, you don't have to do it alone." But how? Before I could even finish, my phone started buzzing like crazy on the table. Another headline popped up. Jackson Pierce had made a public statement, and that first line just stole the air from my lungs. "I wish my ex-wife well, and I hope she can move on and find purpose." Purpose. Like I was just this empty shell without him. My hand was shaking. I saw Adrienne's jaw clench, and right then, you could feel this storm brewing, one that was about to pull all of us into its chaos. For the next few days, I was in such a thick fog, it was hard to breathe. I went to work. I tried to sleep. I tried to make myself eat. I pretended the weight in my chest wasn't getting heavier every time a new article about Jackson's perfect engagement appeared. But even pretending took more energy than I had. Adrian would check in on me every couple of days, never just showing up, always respectful. He brought me soup one time. Another day it was herbal tea. It was always something small, never pushy, but I could feel things changing. His quiet strength made me feel a little bit stronger. The way he looked at me reminded me I wasn't invisible. Even so, I hadn't told him about the pregnancy. It wasn't about trust. I just didn't trust anything anymore. Then I got the call that upended my entire world. I was on the couch with my laptop, staring at a spreadsheet I'd read 10 times and absorbed nothing. My phone lit up with a name I never expected to see again. Harper Quinn, my divorce lawyer. My heart just stopped. We hadn't talked since I signed the papers. "Hello?" I said, my voice so tiny. Comma, Harper said, sounding rushed, with papers shuffling around her. We have to talk. A chill went right through me. Did something happen? I was just looking over your files for a presentation, she said, talking a mile a minute. And I saw something that wasn't right. I thought I made a mistake. I looked again. It wasn't me. What do you mean, not right? I heard her take a sharp breath. Your ex-husband, he didn't review the entire set of documents when he pressured you into signing. I was so confused. Harper, nobody reads everything in those situations. No, she insisted. He made you sign, but he didn't see that his assistant had slipped his own mirror copy into the wrong folder. I sat up straight. Harper, what are you trying to tell me? I'm telling you, she said, her voice slow and deliberate, that Jackson signed a forfeiture clause he never meant to. My stomach just plummeted. Forfeiture of what? I heard more papers rustling, a quiet curse. Comma. The clause says that Jackson Pierce relinquishes all parental rights to any child conceived prior to the divorce date. The whole room tilted. What? I whispered. Legally, Harper went on, her voice shaking a little with shock. If you were to have a child with him, he'd have no rights at all. Not financial, not custodial, nothing. He signed it all away. That moment he forced those papers on me, my world shrank to one single point. My babies. My tiny precious babies were safe from Jackson in a way I couldn't have even dreamed of. But he has no idea, I murmured. No, Harper agreed. And when he learns the truth, and we know he will, he'll try to ruin you in court. But he can't. He signed away all his power. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I never wanted revenge. All I ever wanted was peace. And you're gonna get it, Harper told me softly. But he needs to face the consequences, Kama. Real ones. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time it wasn't from pain. It felt like relief. I need to think, I whispered. You take all the time you want, she said. But Camilla, this is your chance. Don't you be afraid of it. After we hung up, I just stared at the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt the babies give a little flutter inside me, as if they were reminding me they were here, fighting alongside me. A soft knock at the door brought me back. I opened it to find Adrian standing there with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He stopped short when he saw my face, tear-stained, shocked, completely changed. Kama, he said so quietly. What is it? My mouth opened. Our new beginning was here, and for the very first time, I wasn't scared. Adrian, bless his heart, didn't press me for details. He didn't demand to know what was going on or hover over me the way most people do when they smell a secret. He just handed me the warm mug and sat down with me at my little kitchen table, just waiting. He wasn't impatient. He was just there. And it was that gentleness that finally unlocked everything. I'm pregnant, I whispered, the words so quiet I could barely hear them myself. Adrian's expression just softened. He wasn't surprised, wasn't shocked, he was just present. I had a feeling, he said softly, you have a habit of resting your hand on your stomach when you think no one's looking. My breath hitched. You knew? I guessed, he corrected, but I was waiting for you to be ready to tell me. I looked down at my hands, which were shaking. I don't know how to do this by myself. Well, Adrian said, so matter-of-factly, you won't be by yourself. Those 4 little words just about broke me, but it was a good kind of breaking, you know? A release. So I told him all of it. The fragile pregnancy, my fear of losing the babies, Jackson's cruelty, that whirlwind divorce, and finally, what Harper had discovered. By the end, my hot chocolate was cold, but my heart felt so much lighter, like I'd finally let go of years of secrets. Adrien leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees. Camilla, what that man did to you was beyond awful. But this, he said, nodding toward my belly, this isn't where your story ends. It's not even close. I managed a weak laugh. Some days it really feels like it. It's a new beginning, he said gently. You're putting yourself back together. It might not feel like it, but you are. And he was right. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet change. I started my mornings with a walk in Central Park. The autumn air was so clean and crisp, and the trees were letting go of their leaves in these beautiful showers of gold. Every step I took, I felt a piece of the old me waking up, the parts that had been suffocated by Jackson's control. After years of trying to be the woman he wanted, I started being myself again. I wore color, you know, soft greens and warm browns, cozy sweaters that showed off my little bump instead of hiding it. I cooked for myself. I got through work without crying. And most afternoons, Adrienne would stop by. Not every single day, but enough that he became a steady part of my healing. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, and other times we'd just sit in comfortable silence. One Saturday, he showed up with a small white box from a bookstore on Fifth Avenue. I thought you might want this, he said. Inside was a beautiful hardcover journal, a deep forest green with gold-edged pages. For when you're ready to start writing your own story again, he told me. I ran my fingers over the cover. My heart just sort of bloomed. No one had ever given me a gift that truly saw me. Not for what I could do for them, not because I was weak, but just me. When I glanced up, Adrienne was watching me with this incredible warmth in his eyes. I wasn't ready for more, not then. But for the first time, the idea of it didn't scare me. One evening, I was watching the first little snowflakes drift by my window when I felt the baby's kick for the very first time. I gasped and pressed my hand to my belly, tears just flooding my eyes. I had prayed and begged for this moment after losing 2 pregnancies before. These babies, they were strong. They were fighters, just like their mom. I called Adrian without even thinking about it. He didn't ask a single question. He just said, "I'm coming over." As I waited, feeling those tiny little flutters under my hand, a deep sense of peace settled over me. This new life, this unexpected second chance, was really just starting, and none of us knew that Jackson Pierce's perfect world was just about to shatter. While I was slowly putting my life back together in New York, Jackson Pierce was busily tearing his apart without a clue. His engagement to Sienna Vale was everywhere you looked. Glamour was calling them the next great American power couple. The financial papers were applauding Jackson's brilliance for securing his personal life right before he announced the largest merger in biotech. And Sienna, well, she soaked up the attention, posing for cameras as if she'd been born in the spotlight. But behind all that glitter, things were falling apart. The board at Pierce Biosystems wasn't nearly as thrilled about the engagement as Jackson thought they'd be. In fact, some of them were furious. I heard later that investors were whispering about Sienna being a liability, a risk. Some thought the timing was unprofessional, and there were even darker rumors, things said in hushed tones in boardrooms. Why did Jackson rush the divorce? Was there some kind of scandal? Why was he keeping me hidden? Jackson just waved it all away. He was convinced his career was untouchable. Untouchable. But you know, his whole world started to crack on a Tuesday morning. It all began with a tiny computer bug, that big medical software he was so proud of. The one he promised would change everything just started failing during a huge presentation for investors. The whole system even crashed twice. I heard one of his assistants actually passed out from the stress. He lost it, just started screaming at some poor developer in front of everybody. Of course, a video of it was online in a few hours. The company's stock plummeted before lunch. Sienna, his girlfriend at the time, tried to comfort him, but he just snapped at her. That got caught on camera, too, and became a meme overnight. The craziest part, which he didn't know then, was that it wasn't an accident. Someone inside his own company had set him up. And me? I was 3,000 miles away, not thinking about him at all. I was curled up on my little couch with my laptop, just watching the last ultrasound video of you two on a loop. My tiny, perfect, beautiful babies just floating on the screen like a pair of miracles. I remember putting a hand on my stomach and whispering, "You're safe. I'll protect you." But I knew how fragile that promise was, because while I was trying to find some peace, Jackson was spinning out of control, and men like him, they never go down, quote, quietly. The next blow landed a week later. I heard he was in some big board meeting when a folder got slid across the table to him. It was full of proof of missing money that he couldn't explain. Someone had moved funds from a research project into some shell company. He apparently yelled, "Are you calling me a fraud?" But the chairman, Mr. Lee, just calmly asked for an explanation. He flipped through those pages, and I can only imagine his heart pounding. Nothing looked right to him, but the evidence was all there. It was his login, his approval, his digital signature on everything. Someone was framing him, and they were doing it perfectly, piece by piece. His mind must have been racing. But even then, honey, he never once thought of me. He never considered that the woman he'd thrown away could ever matter again. He never thought his past could come back to bite him. And he definitely never imagined another man, someone much more powerful, was quietly watching his whole empire crumble. When the meeting was over, he just stormed out, completely oblivious. He didn't see the little smirk on Chairman Lee's face. He had no idea new deals had been made behind his back. He didn't know his downfall was already in motion, because someone was about to link all of his problems back to that terrible night he forced me to sign those papers. And that's when my contractions started, just as the sun was coming up. I'd been awake most of the night, with this strange feeling in my belly. I kept trying to breathe through it, thinking it was just stress or one of you shifting around. But then the pain got sharp, like a hot wire twisting inside me, and I just knew. My water hadn't broken, but some instinct told me it was time. Fear just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was weeks too early. Not yet. Please, not now. My hands were shaking so much, I could barely dial the one number I knew I could trust. Adrienne answered before it even finished the first ring. It was me. My voice was all shaky. I think it's happening. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't waste a moment. I'm on my way. Don't move. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes before he was there, bringing the cold morning air in with him as he scooped me right into his arms. He was so gentle for such a big, strong man. "You're okay. I've got you." His voice was so steady, it was the only thing keeping me together as the pains kept coming. That cab ride to the hospital is mostly a blur of pain, fear, and Adrienne's calm voice murmuring next to me. By the time we got there, the nurses had me in a wheelchair, rushing me down these bright hallways that smelled like cleaning supplies and panic. I heard one of them mutter, "She's early." Then another asked, "Twins?" "High-risk pregnancy." They were saying you'd go to the neonatal unit. My eyes squeezed shut. Not now, not yet, not when I finally felt like my life wasn't falling apart. Adrienne stayed right by my side the whole time. His hand was wrapped around mine when the doctors put the monitors on my belly. And then, the sound of your two little heartbeats filled the room, so fast and fluttering, like you were fighting to be here. Oh, tears just started streaming down my face when I heard you. They are strong, the doctor told me. They want to be here. I felt such a wave of relief. It felt like my chest was cracking open. Hours felt like they flew by in minutes. Nurses were rushing around, doctors were giving orders, and Adrienne stood there like a statue next to me, just rubbing my hand every time I cried out in pain. Adrienne, I gasped out during another one. I'm scared. I know, he murmured, leaning over me, but you're not alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I believed him. For the very first time in my life, I completely believed him. And then, just a little before noon, with the sun shining on the sterile floor, your brother arrived. His cry cut through the room, so tiny but so fierce. A boy! A nurse shouted. I just sobbed as they laid him on my chest for a moment. He was so small and so pink and so determined. My heart just exploded. Minutes later, we heard a second cry. It was you, my girl. I was laughing through my tears, so tired and overwhelmed as they put you on my shoulder. Two little miracles. My living, breathing heart. You did it, Adrienne whispered, his voice all thick with emotion as he brushed the hair from my forehead. Comma. You did it. I looked up at him, my eyes probably shining. We're okay? I asked. You're more than okay, he said so softly. You're incredible, Lump. You two were whisked off to the neonatal unit so they could watch you closely. I watched you go, and I was so scared, but I was even more proud. You were fighters, just like I had to learn to be. Later, when everything was quiet in my hospital room, Adrian sat in the chair next to my bed. No cameras, no drama, just us and the soft hum of the hospital. You saved us today, I murmured. He just shook his head. You saved yourself, Camilla, and you saved them. I let my eyes drift shut, feeling the exhaustion pull me down. But the last thought I had, before I fell asleep, was that my life wasn't ending. It was just getting started. And on the other side of the country, Jackson Pierce was about to learn a truth that would absolutely ruin him. The news broke before I'd even managed to eat my first meal after having you. I was sitting up in my hospital bed, exhausted but so happy, when a nurse rushed in with her phone, her eyes wide. Oh my God, the nurse whispered. Miss Rhodes, you're trending. I just blinked at her, totally confused. Trending? What on earth did she mean by trending? Before she could explain, Adrienne appeared in the doorway. He looked calm, but I could see his jaw was clenched. A look I knew meant he was furious about something. He was holding his phone down at his side. Comma, he said, so gently. There's something you should see. My stomach just dropped. Is it about the babies? Are they okay? They're perfect, he promised me right away. They're strong, they're beautiful, they're fighters. His voice got so soft. They're yours. I felt myself sag with relief. Then what? Adrienne walked over slowly and handed me his phone, and that's when my world tilted on its axis. There was a single photo on the screen, a grainy picture, obviously snapped by a stranger in the hospital. It showed Adrienne carrying me down the hall that morning, my head on his shoulder. You could just see my hospital gown under his coat. I looked so small and tired, so painfully human. The caption read, Who is the woman? Billionaire Adrian Crowell rushed into NY Mercy this morning, and below it were thousands of comments, people guessing, and then a second picture appeared. It was a nurse wheeling two tiny bassinets down the hall, with two pink blankets and two little heads. A headline just exploded everywhere. Billionaire Adrian Crowell welcomes twins with mystery woman. My blood ran cold. No, I whispered. No, no, no. This isn't true. Adrian, I didn't. We didn't. I know, he said softly. My breath caught in my throat. People will think, yes, he said, they will. Panic started to squeeze my chest. The world had never been very nice to me. Jackson could spin any story with his money, and Sienna with her lies. I knew I wouldn't stand a chance against what people would say. I didn't want this, I whispered. I didn't want to drag anyone into my mess. Adrienne sat down in the chair next to my bed. You're not a mess, Kima. And you didn't drag me anywhere. He paused. But I do want you to know something. My eyes lifted to his, not sure what to think. I released a statement, he said. My heart just stopped. You what? To protect you, he answered, his voice calm, before the press could turn this into something ugly. I swallowed hard. What did you say? He reached out and took my hands, so slowly, giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. I told them the truth, he said quietly. That you're the bravest woman I've ever met. That you fought for those babies with everything you had. That I'm supporting you because you deserve all the help and respect this world never gave you. My throat got so tight I could barely speak. You didn't owe me that, I whispered. I know, he said, but I wanted to. When I couldn't find the words, he added, and I never said they were mine. I let out a shaky breath, but the relief didn't last. My phone buzzed. A new headline, a new story spreading like wildfire. Across the country in Los Angeles, photographers had just caught Jackson Pierce storming out of his office building. Face, just a mask of pale fury. I remember seeing Sienna trailing him, looking so lost, and the headline was everywhere. Jackson Pierce in a rage over viral photos of ex-wife and billionaire with twins. I just looked at the screen, you know? It felt like a ghost from another life had finally found me. But for the first time, it wasn't me who looked weak. It was Jackson. He looked utterly terrified. Jackson Pierce, my dear, always believed two things: that he controlled everything and that I would be nothing without him. Both of those ideas just fell apart when he saw those pictures. He was in some big meeting in Los Angeles when his phone started buzzing off the hook. He ignored it, at first, of course, trying to explain away some other failure. But then everyone in the room started looking at their own phones, and he finally just snapped, asking if something was more important than him. A man named Chairman Lee just slid a tablet over to him. You should see this, he said. And when Jackson looked down, well, his whole world just caved in. It was a picture of me, looking worn out, being held up by another man. Adrian Crowell, the most private and powerful investor in biotech. Then came the next picture. Two little bassinets, two tiny babies, twins. I heard his hands just froze. His throat went dry. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely even see. The headline was shouting, Mystery Twins Billionaire Crowell supports former Mrs. Pierce at hospital. The room started spinning for him. He never heard Chairman Lee end the meeting. He didn't hear Sienna calling for him in the hall. All he heard was this roar in his head. Twins, babies. Me and Adrian Crowell. The one man who could ruin careers with a single phone call, and who, for some reason I never knew, absolutely despised him. He never did understand why. No. He just bolted from the room, pushing past cameras, past his own staff, past Sienna, trying to grab his arm. Jackson, please talk to me, she'd begged. Not now, he growled. But she ran after him, her heels echoing like little explosions. She's doing this to hurt you, she said. She wants to embarrass you. He turned on her so fast, she actually jumped. She had twins, Sienna. Twins. And you want me to think this is just some game? He was shouting, you know, and didn't even notice the intern staring. She got closer then, her voice low. You told me she couldn't, that she was too fragile, that the doctors warned you. She was, he snapped back. There were complications. His voice just broke. He was remembering it all, the tears, my begging him not to leave me alone that night. The memories were hitting him like a train. Sienna touched his arm again, a bit softer. Jackson, are you sure? Those babies aren't. But he cut her off. They can't be mine, he said, just like that. My doctor said. Then he stopped. I guess he remembered it then. The specialist, the diagnosis of temporary infertility, the shots he was supposed to take but didn't. The follow-up he blew off, the doctor's voice in his head. You may still be fertile. For the next few months, his stomach must have just dropped. Oh, God, he whispered. What if... He couldn't even finish the thought. They're not mine, he said again, but this time it sounded like a question. Sienna's eyes got very narrow. Then why does he look just like you? She showed him her phone, a close-up of my little boy. That tiny nose, that jaw, those eyebrows. It was a face that sent a chill right through him, because you couldn't deny it. He stumbled back, unable to breathe. No. Impossible. Except it wasn't. Panic just took over, because if those babies were his, then I wasn't just some news story. I was holding the one thing that could undo him completely. His name, his company, his future, everything he thought he controlled. He grabbed his coat, his voice all scratchy. I'm going to New York. Sienna looked terrified. Jackson, wait. What are you going to do? He didn't even look back at her. Get the truth. But you see, deep down, he already knew the truth was about to tear his world apart. The sky over Manhattan was just as angry as he was that night. Rain was hitting the windows of my hospital room, like the world was giving a warning. I was sleeping, but not soundly. A woman who's been through what I had never really does. My babies were safe in the neonatal unit, little fighters, breathing on their own. I should have been peaceful. But around 2 a.m., I heard the door creak. My eyes flew open. It was that old instinct, you know. I sat right up, my heart pounding. Camilla, my friend Harper Quinn whispered, her coat dripping with rain. I'm so sorry. I know it's late, but I had to come. I was still half asleep. Harper, what is it? She closed the door and pulled out this waterproof folder. It had a logo on it that made my blood run cold. Pierce Biosystems, confidential personnel records. My heart just seized up. Where did you get this? Anonymous delivery, Harper said. It showed up at my office an hour ago. Whoever sent it wanted you to see this before Jackson gets to New York. A wave of fear washed over me. Jackson's coming here, I whispered. She just nodded, her face grim. He's on a red-eye, and he's not coming to talk. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. What does that mean? Harper opened the folder. Inside were photos, emails, financial records, medical papers, all with Jackson's signature. But the one on top, it all came down to one paper, honey, all highlighted and stamped, that Harper handed me. Jackson's fertility report. The one he'd sworn was just a routine checkup. But right there, on page 3, it said in stark black ink that conception was still possible within a 6-month window. My heart hammered in my ears. 6 months. Our babies, you know, they were conceived 4 months before the split. A deep chill went right through me. He knew, I whispered. He knew all along it wasn't impossible. Harper's nod was sharp. And he hid it from you, pushed the divorce, forced you to sign, knowing he might be the father. A little broken sound escaped me. I remember covering my mouth, shaking, thinking of all those nights he dismissed me, all the times he made it my fault, all that pain and shame. It was all a cruel game, a way to punish me. He let me believe I was broken, I whispered, my voice just cracking. He let me think I was the one who couldn't carry a child, that every loss was on me. The tears that fell then weren't sad, they were furious. The betrayal felt brand new. Then Harper slid a second document into my lap. "And this," she said, "is what finishes him." I looked down at the forfeiture clause, the one Jackson signed without a thought, giving up all rights to any child conceived before our divorce. It was legally binding, witnessed, irreversible. "He can't touch your babies, Camila," Harper said softly. "Not legally, not financially, in no way at all." He had signed away all his power. I pressed a hand to my chest where relief and rage were at war. "So why is he coming here?" I whispered. Harper sighed. "Because he hasn't seen this yet. And when he finds out, he loses everything. His company, his name, his engagement. The investors will scatter, the board will have his head, and so will the press." Harper shook her head, almost pitying him. "He's coming to fight for control he's already lost." I closed my eyes, just breathing in that truth. When I opened them, I wasn't scared anymore. I was still. "Let him come," I whispered. For the first time, I wasn't the one who had to run. And your grandfather was about to walk into the complete ruin of his own making. Jackson Pierce arrived in New York like a storm in a fancy suit. He stepped out of a black car in front of the hospital, rain soaking his shoulders, his face a mask of anger and denial. The cameras went off in a flash. The paparazzi had been waiting for hours for him to make a move. "Jackson, are they yours? Did she hide the pregnancy? Is Adrian Crowe the father?" He just shoved his way through, his jaw tight, and told them to get out of his way. Inside the hospital, the security guards watched him with tired eyes. He had the look of a man on the verge of snapping, someone with everything to lose. He found the neonatal unit. He found the hallway. He found my door. But before he could go in, a figure stepped out from the quiet shadows and blocked his path. It was Adrian Crowe, tall, calm, a wall of quiet strength. Jackson froze. "You," he hissed. Adrian's gaze was steady. "You shouldn't be here, Jackson. You don't get to tell me where I can go." Jackson spat back. "Yes," Adrian said so calmly. "I do." Jackson made a move to push past him, but Adrian didn't even flinch. Instead, he pulled an envelope from his coat. "Before you embarrass yourself more," Adrian said, his voice low and sharp, "you should see this." Jackson snatched the envelope and ripped it open. You can just imagine it. First confusion, then disbelief, then just a deep, gut-wrenching horror. It was the clause, with his own signature, his initials, all witnessed, filed, and binding. "No," Jackson whispered. "No, I didn't. This wasn't—" Adrian just watched him crumble. "You signed away your rights," Adrian said, "to any child conceived before the divorce." Jackson's face twisted in anger. "She tricked me." "She didn't trick you," Adrian said sharply. "You bullied her. You forced her. You rushed the papers and didn't read what you signed." Jackson's eyes were wild. "She can't keep them from me. I'm their father." And then Adrian let the final truth fall. "You are nothing to them, legally or otherwise." Jackson's breath just hitched. "And to be clear," Adrian went on, his voice like iron, "Camila owes you nothing. Not her children, not her time, not her peace. You planned this," Jackson growled. "You and that lawyer." "I didn't plan a thing," Adrian cut in. "Your own actions did." Then another thought hit Jackson. "You knew?" he accused. "You knew she was pregnant in the park." "I suspected," Adrian said. But it wasn't my truth to tell. Jackson stepped closer, trembling with fury. "Stay out of my family." "Oh, you destroyed your family," Adrian replied, his voice so steady and cold. "The night you left your wife in a parking garage. Don't rewrite the history you chose." Jackson's fist tightened. "I'll fight this." "And lose," Adrian said. "Everything is documented. Every signature is yours. Every lie tracks back to you." Then Adrian closed the space between them. "And if you try to hurt her," he said, softly, but with real danger in his voice, "I will make sure you lose much more than a custody battle." For the first time, I think, in his entire life, Jackson looked genuinely afraid. Before he could say a word, a nurse came out of my room. "Mr. Crow, the twins are ready for their feeding." Jackson inhaled sharply. "They're here?" he whispered. "Right behind that door?" Adrian nodded once. "And you don't get to see them," he said. Jackson's face just fell. And Adrian walked right past him into the room where I was waiting with the babies, leaving Jackson Pierce all alone in that cold hall, soaked in rain and his own mistakes. It was the first time the world saw him, not as a tycoon, but as a man who had lost control of everything. The morning after Jackson's dramatic hospital visit, New York City woke up to a brand new villain, and his name was trending all over the world. The gossip sites showed no mercy. Pierce meltdown. Crow versus Pierce. Protect Camilla. Every headline said the same thing. A powerful man was finally facing the music. And me, Camilla Rhodes, I had somehow become a national symbol of quiet strength. News channels played that visitor's cell phone video on a loop, showing Adrian blocking Jackson's path down the hall. That clip went viral in hours. Millions of people watched Adrian stand between me and Jackson like a shield, his voice so calm but firm. "He destroyed his own family," he said. "Don't rewrite the history you chose." Those words resonated with everyone. Meanwhile, Jackson was sitting in an SUV outside, his hands shaking with anger, humiliation, and a kind of fear he'd never felt before. His phone rang and rang. Board members, lawyers. He ignored them all until Sienna, his fiancée, called. She didn't sound loving. She sounded terrified. "Jackson, the board called me. They want to know if you lied. They think this will kill the merger." Jackson dragged a hand through his hair. "I didn't lie." "Then why didn't you tell them you might have kids?" she snapped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know," he shouted. "Everyone knows now," Sienna hissed. "And they're turning on you. Do you realize what this does to my brand? I'm being crucified online because of you." Jackson closed his eyes. So not even she was on his side anymore. "Just stay in LA, he said flatly. "Stay?" she repeated. "Jackson, I'm not sure." "Don't," he warned, his voice low. "Don't say something you can't take back." But it was too late. The line went dead. His empire was crumbling by the second. Inside my hospital room, it was so peaceful. I held my baby girl while Adrian fed her brother from a little bottle. The morning sun was filtering through the giant blinds, making everything golden. It was the calmest I had felt in years. Adrian glanced over. "How are you holding up?" I let out a long breath. "Better than I expected." "Strong," he said with a little smile. "Stronger every day." I blushed and looked down at my daughter. "I don't know about strong." "Oh, I do," he murmured. But before I could reply, my phone started buzzing with dozens of messages pouring in. Headlines, mentions, tags. Then I saw a text from Harper. "He's losing everything. The board is voting to suspend him, and the court confirmed the forfeiture clause is airtight. He has no case. None." My breath caught. I hadn't wanted revenge, honey, just justice. and this felt like justice. Adrian read my face. "Camilla," he said gently, "you don't owe him compassion." After what he did, I swallowed. I don't want to hurt him. I just want him out of our lives. And he will be, Adrian promised. But the world deserves to know who you are, too. I hesitated. Who am I? A woman who survived him, Adrian said softly, and built something stronger. Tears filled my eyes, not from pain, but from sheer relief. And just as that calm settled over me, a nurse hurried in. "Miss Rhodes, a crowd is forming outside. Press, protesters, supporters, security is asking if you'd like a private exit." I blinked. Protesters. Nodded. People are demanding accountability. For you. For her. For the first time, people actually believed me. But outside, another kind of truth was hitting the fan. Jackson had finally made it to his board meeting, with no idea that his career was already over. That boardroom, it was like a glass cage high above the city, built for power, not for forgiveness. The rain was beating against the glass, trying to get in. Inside, the board sat, in this cold, quiet half-circle, their faces like stone. The air was thick, like it is before an execution. Jackson walked in late. His suit was a mess, his tie was crooked, and his eyes were red from a night without sleep and a lifetime of pride crumbling in a day. He tried to straighten his jacket as if that could fix anything. "Gentlemen," he started, trying to sound in control, "whatever you've seen online." "Sit," Chairman Lee said. Just that one word, and it cut him to ribbons. Jackson stiffened, but he sat down, his jaw tight. The projector flickered on. It wasn't showing spreadsheets or charts. It was showing headlines. Pierce CEO concealed ex-wife's pregnancy. Public erupts over Jackson Pierce's silence. Biotech scandal. CEO accused of abandoning pregnant wife. Crowell steps in. Where was Pierce? Each one was like a slap in the face. "We've weathered storms before," Jackson snapped. "This is just a PR issue." "This is not PR," a board member named Santos cut in. "This is a pattern." Another one leaned in. "And now, possible financial misconduct." Jackson's heart must have stopped. What misconduct? The lights went down a little, and a folder slid across the table to him. "Several transactions were authorized by you," Chairman Lee said. "Funds moved to a shell company. Millions of dollars, just gone." "I didn't approve those," Jackson stammered. "Someone tampered." "Then why?" Lee said, so slowly. "Were they authorized from your office? Your devices? Your personal login?" I can just imagine Jackson's pulse hammering in his ears. "Someone hacked me." Santos just laughed. "How convenient." "This is Adrian Crowell," Jackson hissed, leaning over the table. "He's setting me up. He's trying to ruin me." "No," Lee said, his voice calm. "The timing lines up with your choices." Then the screen changed. Pictures of me, pregnant, in the hospital, with Adrian looking after me. A picture of the twins' bassinets. The room went silent. Lee folded his hands. "You lied to us." I can see the color rising in Jackson's neck. "I didn't know she was pregnant. She hid it from me." Lee didn't even blink. "We have medical records showing you were warned about temporary infertility. You knew it was possible. Yet you hid that from us while you rushed the divorce and announced your engagement." Then Santos added, "We also received a legal statement confirming you signed away your parental rights." The shame must have been suffocating. "You're asking us to believe," Lee said, "that you abandoned your wife, tried to erase a pregnancy, and now want to lead a company that's supposedly built on ethics?" Jackson slammed his hand on the table. "I am this company." "No," Lee said, just as calmly. You were. Jackson just froze. Lee held up a piece of paper. This is a vote for your immediate suspension, pending an investigation. No, Jackson whispered, his voice finally breaking. You can't. We can, Santos said, and we will. One by one, every board member raised their hand. He had to watch each vote as it buried him. Suspended, powerless, erased, the same things he tried to do to me. This is a mistake, he pleaded. I built this. And now it's collapsing, Lee told him, because of you. His vision started to blur. His phone was buzzing, over and over. He didn't look, but he could see the preview on the screen. It was from Sienna. We're done. Don't contact me. Charles. Again, you know, it's funny how things look from a distance. While I was holding you both for the first time, Jackson was losing everything. In just 12 hours, his whole world came crashing down. The company, the engagement, his precious reputation. I was finally free of him, safe in New York. But he wasn't done, not by a long shot. He was cornered, and that's when he did something that would send all of our lives spinning out of control. I heard he walked out of that meeting in a total haze, stumbling through the rain, not even hearing the reporters shouting his name. He couldn't even get in his car. His empire, the life he built, had vanished. All because of me, because of Adrian, and because of the two beautiful babies he refused to believe were real. He apparently just stood in that cold parking garage, wondering how it all went so wrong. How, he whispered, did she beat me? He must have been replaying that hospital video in his head, the one where I looked so tired but so happy holding you. That image, I think, was a testament to every single one of his mistakes. It wasn't about being angry with me anymore. He was furious with himself, and he was terrified. If you two were his, you were his legacy, and he'd signed you away. It was a choice he thought he could never take back, but then a twisted little idea started to form in his mind. He wasn't thinking about violence, but information. He decided he would find something, anything, to hold over Adrian's head. If he couldn't have you two by law, he would make sure Adrian couldn't have me. He picked up his phone and called a name he hadn't spoken in years. Marcus, he said, I need dirt on Kroll, every last secret he has. There was this long, heavy silence. Jackson, the man said, going after Kroll is a death wish. I don't care, Jackson told him. Do it. But Marcus's voice got serious. You have no idea, he said. Kroll moves in circles you've never even heard of. If you do this, he'll bury you. A little shiver of fear must have gone through him then, but his anger was bigger. I'm already buried, Jackson hissed. Just dig. Miles and miles away, I knew nothing of this. I was just holding your brother, humming a little tune as the sun went down outside my hospital window. Adrian was sitting right there with me, just watching over us. You don't have to stay all night, I told him quietly. I know, he said, his voice so gentle, but I want to. I remember really looking at him in that moment, and this knot of fear I'd been carrying for years started to loosen. Having him there felt like coming home. You're thinking too hard, he said, trying to make me smile. It's a lot, I admitted. A good kind of a lot, but still. He moved a little closer. You don't have to figure anything out right now. You just had twins. Your only job right now is to heal. My heart just melted a little. I'm trying, he smiled. You're doing great. But as I looked past him, I saw something that made my breath catch. There was a man standing across the street. He was wearing a dark coat, just staring at the hospital entrance. Adrian, I whispered, is that... His whole body went still. He got up and moved to the window with this quiet grace, like a man who knew what danger looked like. "It's not Jackson," he said after a moment. "He's not built the same." "Then who is it?" Adrian let out a slow breath. "Someone watching me. Or us." A cold feeling washed over me. "What does that mean?" "It means," Adrian said, and his jaw was set like stone, "that Pierce isn't our only problem. Someone else is on the board now. One of you little ones stirred, and I pulled you closer. For the first time since you were born, I felt a real, true fear, not for me, but for you. Because I knew, deep down, that whatever was coming for us wasn't going to be safe." That person outside the hospital just stood there, unmoving. He was under a streetlight that kept flickering, his collar pulled up against the cold. It was like he was listening for something only he could hear. People walked by, cars drove past, but he never moved, his eyes fixed on the windows of our wing. He could have been a guard, or he could have been a hunter. "Adrian, who is that?" I asked again. He took his time answering, just watching the man with a kind of stillness I'd come to understand later. It was the silence of a man who knew that what isn't said is often the most important thing. "He's not a reporter," Adrian murmured. "Then what?" He finally turned to look at me. "A complication." My heart started pounding. "Is this because of Jackson?" "In a way," Adrian said. "When a man with Jackson's power falls, it brings the wolves out." I held my breath. Wolves? He meant competitors, investors, shadowy firms, people who can smell a wounded animal and want to see if he's dying or if he can be saved. Adrian's jaw clenched. "And some of them want to know about the twins." My arms tightened around you automatically. "They're just babies. Why?" "Because they're Pierce's," Adrian said, his voice soft. "And because Jackson's enemies want something to hold over him." Leverage. The word felt like a stone in my stomach. Adrian came closer and put a hand on my shoulder. "No one is going to touch you or the babies, not as long as I'm here." But the fear was already taking root. At that very same time, so far away, Jackson was sitting in some cheap motel, the expensive suit and polished CEO look completely gone. His phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't know. He answered, his voice rough. "Who is this?" A calm voice he'd never heard before replied, "Someone who knows you've lost your company." Jackson went rigid. "If this is about the board—" "It's not," the voice cut in. "It's about the twins." The silence that followed was heavy and awful. Jackson's throat went dry. "What about them?" "You're a desperate man," the voice said, "and desperate men can be useful." Jackson could barely swallow. "What do you want?" "Not what I want," the voice corrected him. "It's about what you want. Access, information, control." A wave of dread must have washed over him. "Meet me tomorrow," the caller said, "or you'll lose the only card you have left to play." Then the line went dead. Jackson was gripping his phone so hard his knuckles were white. "Someone else was after you too. Someone who didn't give a thought about me. Someone who saw your father's weakness as an opportunity." He slammed his fist on the table. "No," he whispered. "They're mine." But the truth was a bitter pill. He had no legal right to you, and certainly no moral one. He had nothing left but his desperation. And that, my dears, is what made him so dangerous. Back in my hospital room, Adrian had a nurse take you both for an hour so I could get some rest. But I couldn't sleep. I just kept seeing that man's shadow outside. Every little noise in the hall made me jump. An hour later, Adrian came back, and his whole expression had changed. It was harder, colder. "I had someone run his face," he said. I sat straight up. "And?" He's ex-private intelligence, Adrian told me. A fixer, the kind of person executives hire when they need a problem to disappear. My breath hitched. Disappear? He's not here to hurt you, Adrian said, right away. If that was the plan, he wouldn't be standing out in the open. He's here to watch, to gather information. On the babies? I whispered. On me, Adrian corrected. On why a man as powerful as Jackson Pierce would throw everything away for a woman he'd already cast aside. My eyes started to fill with tears. Adrian, I don't want to be in the middle of a war. He came and knelt by my bed, taking both of my hands in his. You didn't start this war, he said, his voice steady and strong. But you and I are going to finish it. I let out a shaky breath. And Jackson? Adrian's voice turned to steel. Jackson is about to find out what happens when you hurt someone good. He stood up then and glanced back out the window at the man in the shadows. I remember Adrian's jaw getting tight. He knew he wouldn't be the only one watching, because that storm we felt coming, it wasn't on its way anymore. It was here, and we were standing right in the middle of it. By the time I was finally allowed to leave NY Mercy with you two, the rain outside had softened to a drizzle. You and your brother were cleared to go home with lots of monitoring, and despite being bone-tired, I finally felt a little sliver of hope. Adrian insisted we go to his penthouse. He said it was more secure, safer than my little apartment in Washington Heights. I didn't fight him on it. I couldn't. Not with those odd men I'd seen watching the hospital, not with Jackson losing control, and not with that quiet fear that something big was about to happen. It didn't take long. Our SUV had just turned into the private garage under Adrienne's building when these headlights just blinded us from the other end. Too bright, coming way too fast. We heard the screech of tires on the wet concrete. Adrienne, also, Adrian reacted in a heartbeat. Get down, he ordered, his arm shooting out to cover me as he used his own body to shield your carriers. The other car's door flew open, and Jackson Pierce practically fell out. He was soaked, frantic. His suit was a wrinkled mess, and his hair was stuck to his forehead. He didn't look like the polished CEO everyone knew. He looked like a man who was lost at sea. Kama, he yelled, his voice cracking. I have to talk to you. Adrian got out of our car, blocking Jackson's way completely. Turn around. You're trespassing. Get out of my way, Jackson hissed. I'm talking to my wife. My heart clenched. But Adrian didn't move an inch. She's not your wife, Adrian said, his voice calm but ice cold. And you don't belong here. Jackson's eyes were furious. You stole her from me. No, Adrian replied. You threw her away. That's when Jackson lunged. But Adrian slammed him back against a concrete pillar. His forearm pressed right into Jackson's collarbone. Jackson choked, struggling against him. You don't get it, Jackson gasped out. I need to see the twins. I felt my own breath catch in my throat. I got out of the car slowly, still holding your sister close. Why? I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. Why now? Jackson froze right there. Rain was dripping from his eyelashes, and his chest was heaving. His voice trembled when he answered, because I think they're mine. The silence that fell then felt heavy enough to crush us. I felt my fingers start to tremble. They were always yours, Jackson. I never lied to you about that. His face crumpled in confusion. Then why didn't you tell me? He rasped. I had to swallow the lump in my throat. Would you have believed me? You told me I couldn't carry a baby. You told me I was the issue. My voice finally broke. You walked away from me. One by one, Jackson's eyes flicked between me, you two, and Adrian, who still had a hand on his chest. I made mistakes. Jackson breathed out. But I can fix it. I can be a part of this. I want to be in their lives. I remember just looking at him, really seeing him, and felt something inside of me settle. It wasn't pity or love or even hate. It was just clarity. No, I said softly. You can't. Jackson just blinked. Camilla, you signed away your rights, I went on, my voice getting stronger. You made your choice before they were even here. You don't get to come back and change the story because you have regrets now. Jackson's jaw was shaking. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I cut in. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Adrienne and I slowly let go, stepping back to stand beside me, a living shield. Jackson's voice finally shattered. So that's it? I lose them. Too? I held your brother a little tighter. You lost them the night you lost me. Jackson's breath hitched. But I loved you, he whispered. My eyes softened, not with forgiveness, just with the plain truth. You loved control, I told him. And when you didn't have that anymore, there was nothing left. Jackson swayed, looking so desperate and beaten, as the rain washed away the last of his pride. And that's when Adrian stepped forward, his voice quiet but absolute. Leave now. This is the last time you'll come near her or the twins. Next time, I promise you won't walk away. Jackson just stared at us. At me. At you. Babies. At the man protecting us with this hollow, devastated look. Then he turned and stumbled away into the dark. I let out a shaky breath, leaning into Adrienne's solid frame. For the first time since the divorce, I truly felt free. But the real ending hadn't happened yet. Tomorrow the whole world would see me take my life back. The next morning, New York was buzzing before the sun was even up. The city was just electric with anticipation. It wasn't about a celebrity scandal or a market crash. It was about me, Camila Rodes, the quiet woman who went through betrayal and public humiliation and somehow came out stronger. Outside Adrian's penthouse, a crowd had formed, reporters, supporters, even strangers, with signs that said things like, "We stand with Camilla and justice for moms." It was a strange sight. Power doesn't make a family. Love does. Inside, things were peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making everything golden. I sat there with you and your brother nestled in my arms. Your tiny, even breaths soothed an ache in my chest I hadn't realized I was carrying. My lawyer, Harper Quinn, came in holding a stack of documents. "It's time," she said gently. "If you're ready." I looked down at you two, at your perfect faces, your little hands curling around my fingers. I took a deep breath. Steady. I am. Adrian Nee came and stood beside me, offering his hand. He wasn't demanding or assuming anything, just offering support. I took it. The press conference was small and held in a secure room downstairs, far from the shouting. Only a few trusted reporters were there, with our legal teams. The cameras flashed when I walked in, but for once, I didn't feel like shrinking. I didn't tremble. I stood tall, feeling soft, but also completely unbreakable. Harper nudged the microphone toward me. "Whenever you're ready," she whispered. I cleared my throat, and my voice came out quiet, but it was steady. I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I never wanted headlines or scandals or any of this attention. I just wanted a peaceful marriage. I wanted to start a family with someone I thought loved me. I had to pause, the emotion catching in my throat. But life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes people will take advantage of your quiet nature, your kindness, your trust. The room was dead silent. And sometimes, I continued, my voice getting stronger, life gives you a chance to rebuild everything that was shattered. I looked straight into the cameras. not with anger, just with truth. I didn't hide my pregnancy. I didn't hide my children. I protected them from a man who made me believe I wasn't enough. But I am enough, and my children are enough, and we are going to live our lives without being afraid. Then Harper stepped up, holding a single piece of paper, the document that sealed Jackson's fate. This, Harper announced, is the legally binding forfeiture of parental rights, signed by Jackson Pierce. It is final, irrevocable, and completely enforceable. A wave of shock went through the room, and Harper added, "There will be no custody battle, no visitation rights, and no financial claims. The children are solely, entirely, and legally Camilla's." Flash, flash, flash. I felt my lungs open up, like I was taking my first full breath in years. Then the next shoe dropped, and it wasn't me who did it, but Harper. In addition, evidence of Mr. Pierce's fraudulent transfers and his unethical behavior has been given to federal investigators. A full inquiry has been opened. There were gasps and murmurs. I saw Adrian's jaw tighten with grim approval. Justice hadn't just shown up. It had arrived with thunder. Across the country, surrounded by reporters outside the ruins of the empire he'd built, Jackson Pierce watched the live stream on someone's phone. All the color drained from his face. The board's vote, the investigation, the forfeiture clause, and in that moment, I think he finally saw it wasn't about me. All the things he'd tried to hide had created their own avalanche, and he was standing right in its path. It wasn't my revenge. It was just the bill coming due. Later that night, with you two sleeping so soundly, I felt a bone-deep quiet settle in. Adrian came and sat with me, giving me space, but also his strength. He told me I'd moved mountains, but honey, all I'd done was finally speak my truth. He looked at me then and said something I'll never forget, that I deserved more than just to survive. I deserved joy. And then he told me if I ever wanted that future with him, he'd be there. It wasn't a promise or a demand. It was just an open door. For the first time, I felt truly free. I remember leaning my head against his shoulder, watching the city lights twinkle. I knew my children were safe, my name was my own again, and the past was finally behind me. The future was just this big, beautiful, empty canvas. That, my dear, was the real beginning. It's funny how we think the biggest obstacles are there just to stop us. But looking back, I can see that heartbreak didn't block my path. It became my path. It forced me to find a different way forward, a better one. It showed me a strength I never knew I possessed. Every single wound taught me something new. Every loss was just a chance to start over. Life, I learned, doesn't always tie things up with a perfect bow, but it always gives you the chance to become more than the people who tried to diminish you. And if you ever face a moment that feels too heavy, my love, you remember that. You can always rebuild. You always deserve peace. I hope my story shows you that. And know that you are never, ever alone in your struggles, not for a moment. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.